Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our first launch of the autumn season. And I'm Janetta from Otter Barry Books. And we are just so proud to be publishing Rachel Rooney's first collection for teens. I published her very first book back in 2011 at Francis Lincoln. That was The Language of Cat, recognizing that she was an extraordinary talent. And she won the Clipper for that book, for her debut. Since then, she's really become one of the most highly regarded poets writing today, very, very deservedly. And her first book for Otter Barry Books was A Kid in My Class, which I would say is a jewel of the primary classroom. And if I may say, it's set to become a classic. With Hey Girl, Rachel is in new territory, writing for young teens. And it's just a very, very exciting collection about coming of age, finding yourself, both reassuring, inspiring, a bit unsettling. They're very exciting. So we're just so lucky to have the wonderful and insightful Nikki Gamble here this evening to help us launch the book and to talk to Rachel about her work. And I just know it's going to be an absolutely fascinating evening. So could I hand over to you, Nikki?
You certainly can, Janetta, and I'm excited too. So we'll just take you off the spotlight and then we'll get going. I am really thrilled to be taking part in this launch with Rachel Rooney, and I'm pleased to see that everybody has found their way around the chat facility. So there's lots of opportunity for you to share your thoughts and your reflections, because Rachel is going to be reading a lot of poems for us. There are 8 poems at least that we're going to hear this evening, and no doubt you'll want to share your thoughts and feelings about those poems with each other. We're also going to build in opportunities for you to ask questions, and to do that, can I just ask that you use the Q&A facility, which is at the bottom of your screen. I'm sure you're very familiar with this by now, but if not, it's the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. Please don't raise your hand, because we won't be taking questions that way, and we won't be taking questions from the chat either. So if you have a question for Rachel, it's through the Q&A facility, which is on the bottom menu of your screen. Also, we're going to be inviting you this evening to ask questions at various points through the evening. We would ask that you keep those focused on the poems that Rachel has read and the themes that emerge at that point. And then if you have more general questions, there'll be plenty of opportunity at the end of the session to ask those. We're just trying to keep a really good flow through the event this evening. So let me just go to screen share very briefly before I introduce Rachel. I wanted to not interrupt Rachel's event, but to very briefly mention that with Otter Barry Books, we will have another launch later this week with the wonderful James Mayhew. It's an opportunity to think about words, images, and stories, and also to think about the importance of those in education. And James will be inviting us into his creative process. Very excited about seeing the slides that he's prepared to share. So if you want to take part in that event on Thursday at the same time, you can do that just by RSVPing to assistant.literature@gmail.com in the same way that you've done for Rachel's event this evening. So, my introduction to the wonderful Rachel Rooney. She's a poet and a former teacher of children with special needs. I've had the great pleasure of working with Rachel with student teachers, and I've witnessed how well they responded to her work, how appreciative they were of her understanding and care for the children that she has taught and those that she meets on her visits into schools. As Janetta said, Rachel's poetry collections include The Language of Cats, which was longlisted for the Carnegie and won the Clipper in 2012. Her second collection, My Life as a Goldfish, was also shortlisted for the Clipper Poetry Award. In fact, I think she's a permanent fixture on that award because the third collection, A Kid in My Class, was also shortlisted. Tonight, Rachel's going to be introducing us to her latest collection, Hey Girl, and we shall discover as we go on this journey with her that it's a semi-autobiographical series of poems aimed at a young teen readership. Welcome, Rachel, and congratulations on the publication of this new collection.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to have it published.
I know that this is a very personal project. You make that explicit right at the beginning in your author's introduction. And I wondered whether a good starting point for anybody who hasn't seen the book yet or read it would be to start with those reflections, those recollections of your teenage self.
Yeah. So, yeah, I do an introduction where I describe the experience of the last poem that I wrote as a child. I was quite a reader and a writer from the ages of about 8 to 13, and then I kind of stopped until I was 40. I didn't pick up a pen for many years. But this last poem that I wrote, I had, for some reason, I don't know why, climbed out of my bedroom window. I do put a disclaimer that no children should do this, and edged along the roof and perched up on the roof stack and kind of sat there until it went dark, and came back and wrote a little 4-line poem. And I have it somewhere. I can't find it now, but it's on a tiny little scrap of paper in the attic somewhere. And I talk about how I wished maybe I'd carried on writing, and how writing might have helped me through the highs and lows of my teen years, because it certainly helped me through the highs and lows of my early 40s, which was another complicated time for me. I gained a lot from writing poetry, not only just producing the poems, but the process of writing was a way of me processing my own emotions and getting to the nub of what I was feeling and working out how I felt by writing. So it's a kind of encouragement for young people who often tail off about the ages of 12 and 13 to carry on writing, unlike me.
We both shared a climbing over the roof and sitting by the chimney stack. I couldn't believe that somebody else had done that.
Maybe it's common, I don't know.
I don't know either. I wondered what it felt like when you discovered that poem that you'd written when you were 13 years old. Were you surprised?
No, I always remembered that I had it. I always remembered because I've got 2 poems from my childhood, one of which I put in My Life as a Goldfish, and I kind of always knew they were there. I kept them. My parents didn't keep them. I didn't show any of my work to my parents. It was all just for me. So I was kind of aware it was there, but it was quite nice looking back on it and seeing a kind of snapshot of my former self.
So was that the moment that you decided to put this collection together?
No, I'd always wanted to write for that in-between age, that kind of liminal, not quite child, not quite adult. And when I write for myself, it always seems to come out either as a kind of adult-like child poem or a childish adult poem. So that I kind of fall naturally into that age range. But when The Language of Cat came out 15 years ago, there wasn't so many opportunities for secondary poetry. I think with the CLPE and National Poetry Day and Janetta and people like Janetta have kind of really opened up the world of poetry and broadened it. And so in the language of cat, I kind of pushed towards that age range, but I couldn't really quite go there because I don't think there really was a market for secondary poetry. Or so I've always wanted to write this collection, and I didn't know if I ever would, but I always had poems that I'd written, sometimes for myself or sometimes for other reasons, and I kind of kept them in the bottom drawer. And when the time was right, which was quite recently, I kind of went through them, and some of them I discarded because they weren't appropriate. They didn't fit the feel of the book, but the feel of the book is very much a personal reflection on life. And
did you rework any of those older poems?
Yeah, a few were reworked. Some I kind of brought down a little bit because they were a little bit too adult, so I changed a couple of words here and there, or a couple of references that I thought would be outside of the 12 plus bracket. I mean, I think the book is for anyone over 12, but you know, I was conscious that 12, 13, 14-year-olds would be reading it. So there was a little bit of tweaking went on, a little bit of editing, polishing up.
And we are going to hear some poems in a moment, but I'm interested to know whether you enjoyed that reworking process, going back after some time and revisiting these poems and reworking them.
Yes, some of the poems seem to be set in stone, and once they're there, I can't change them. But some of them kind of asked to be rewritten, you know, and come out better. So I love editing. I love that polishing. I love that final process. The initial process, getting the bones of the poem down, I find quite hard, but I love the tweaking.
So a collection has to have a structure. What decisions, before we are coming on to the poem, everybody, I promise you, but before we get there, it has to have a structure. What decisions did you make about what comes first and what comes last?
I kind of wanted to give it a vague arc. I mean, life isn't linear, so but I kind of wanted to establish the character of the girl fairly early on, and then address social relationships with other people, address interpersonal relationships, kind of boyfriendy type stuff. But I wanted to, and then there was a few poems around resilience, and you know, there's a little, you know, there is some dark in there, but I kind of wanted to make it more hopeful towards the end, you know, so that just in life, if you have a hump, you know, you have to battle through it, and you kind of learn something from it, and you know, gain strength from what you've learned and what you've been through, really.
I think we're going to get a feel for that structure because of the poems that you've chosen to share with everybody today. And we're going to start with the first poem in the book. Maybe you could introduce that to us and then read it.
Shall I read the four-liner that I did?
Well, we could start with that one. Yes. I
think I should do the four-liner first, because the poem afterwards kind of addresses that four-liner.
Yeah.
So this is the poem I wrote when I was 13. It's only a four-liner, quite simple, but there is some nuance there, and there is some kind of deeper meaning to it, as from what I understand of my 13-year-old self. So this was the poem that I wrote when I came back out off from the roof. The sky at night is like a precious stone, studded with flecks of silver and a pearl, surrounded, even though I am alone, covered like an unprotected girl.
It's interesting because you were alone there, literally, by the chimney stack. I wonder whether you felt alone. You've talked a little bit about how you were diagnosed late with autism.
Yeah.
That's kind of made you understand things from earlier in your childhood.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting. It might help us understand the collection in a different way as well, if you were to say something about that.
Well, I mentioned it in the introduction, partly because a lot of the poems have a kind of autistic bent to them. I mean, you might not know it. I mean, when I look back on some of the old poems I've written, I was like, well, yes, you know, it's obviously, it seemed quite relevant, but even though I didn't realise it. Also, my son, who illustrated the collection, has got an autism diagnosis. These things are often familial. He got his very young. He got his at 7, and I got mine at 53. So there's a kind of autistic feel to the book, although I didn't want to kind of market it as such, because it's really a book about being human, really. But also, I do think that when I kind of picked up poetry at 40, I became absolutely obsessed with it. I mean, really obsessed. I spent 4 years studying it. I did various different courses. I did 3 Arvons. You know, I just wanted to understand poetry. So in a way, it was like a bit of a special interest for me that's kind of lasted 20 years. And a lot of the poems are, you know, I quite like patterning. I like patterns, and I like systemizing. And so a lot of my poems are quite sort of, they do have that kind of autistic patterning feel to them. And I do like pattern poems, and I like sonnets and things like that. You know.
Lots of patterning for us to talk about in the poems that you've chosen to read today. But let's go to the first poem, apart from the one that you wrote when you were 13. And we'll just take me off the screen so we can just see you for this.
Okay, so this poem is the opening poem, and I get the title of the book from this poem, and it's responding to my 13-year-old self, kind of reminding her how far that she'd come already, and kind of giving her encouragement to keep going. And yes, it's kind of thinking about that we go through many developmental stages, and you know, even arriving here is a bit of a miracle. Even actually being born is you know, is a sort of 1 in a million chance. So it's called XX, or Kiss Kiss, and I haven't quite decided how to pronounce that yet, but off we go. Hey girl, you're a miracle already. What are the odds a cluster of cells could grow human from a mother's womb and arrive in a bright world, blinking and blue? That was you. Hey girl, remember you had the power to commando crawl over sharp bricks, risk unsteady steps in hard new shoes, turn upside down on swings for the view. That was you. Hey girl, you're simply a sacred being machine. Nobody is perfect, but you are perfectly yours. Hold fast this thought. If others try to undo it, I am sending you this, and a kiss or two. I was you.
And one thing that doesn't come across when you read it in quite the same way is the visual aspect of that. And so nobody is perfect is also nobody is perfect when you see it on the page. I mean, I read that as a very life-affirming poem about coming to feel comfortable in your skin, about not being obsessed with perfection. Have you come, it's a personal question here, but have you come to feel more comfortable in your skin?
Yes, I mean, I think teen years for anybody is a tricky time. It's a time of change. I mean, you're physically changing and developing. Girls develop quicker than boys, and it's all a little bit awkward, and you start having periods and your breasts grow, and it can feel quite uncomfortable. But I was kind of harking back to that visceral feeling of childhood. You know, they say that childhood ends when you stop running for no reason. You know, like, do you remember you just run for no reason down a hill or along the street, and kind of I wanted to try and hold on to that, or to encourage anyone to hold on to that, you know, through those tricky teen years.
I think you'd laugh if I tried hanging upside down on a swing now.
I know, but I used to do it a lot as a child. I don't know if you did. I mean, children do like to sort of see life from different perspectives, don't they? Hanging upside down and upside down on the sofa and stuff like that.
And of course, that's what you do as a poet. You hang us all
Yeah.
upside down so that we can
looking at
see.
things from a different viewpoint. Yeah.
Talking about different viewpoints, that's one of the things through the book. Some of the poems are written as though they are you, whether it's you or the persona of you. And some of the poems are written as though they are the young you or the persona of the young you. And the next couple of poems that we're going to hear, they have a first person perspective, and they take us into the internal world of the teenager or young woman. I'm going to actually share some slides at this point so that people can see the illustration. And we have got a question about that, so I'll come to that after you've talked about the poems. So bear with me while I just put these on the screen. Okay. Actually, we don't have one for the first poem, do we?
No.
The
first poem is quite a nice illustration. It's very bold, exciting one.
Bear with me. That's that one. Mask. Are you going to read Mask first, Rachel, and then Worry Doll?
I was going to read Worry Doll first.
Okay, let's do that then.
So early on, I kind of established the character, and this is one of the things. Anxiety is a kind of superpower of mine. I'm very good at it. I don't know if I ever had one of those little worry dolls, but if I did, I'd probably worry about her. So this is what that's about. Worry doll. I had a little worry doll with peg legs made of wood. I bound her up in woolen thread as tightly as I could. A strip of tablecloth was cut to fix a skirt of lace. Carefully, in felt-tip pen, I fashioned her a face. I found a box of safety matches, emptied out the dead. Twice I painted over it in fire engine red. I laid her on a tissue bed and whispered at her ear, then slipped my secret back inside and watched it disappear. I worry for my worry doll, so once in every while, I'll slide her out again and reapply her fading smile.
Just talking about patterning for a moment. I mean, I don't know if this is part of what you meant, but I was very struck in that poem by an auditory patterning. Seems that there were lots of clipped sounds, dental sounds, T's and D's, which actually adds to that sense of unease. Is that something that you were deliberately doing there?
I think semi-deliberately. I really do listen to the sounds of things. I emptied out the dead. You know, that's quite a sharp, effective way of using. Yeah, I read my poems out continually as I'm writing them, and when I'm dog walking, I'm reading them aloud to myself, or I'm practicing them in my head just to get the sound right as much as what they look on the page. It's a balance, isn't it, between how they look on the page and how they sound, and the meaning. It's a kind of juggling act between the three things, really. Yeah.
Do you have recollections of actually writing that poem?
I don't. It was a fairly recent one, actually. I think that was kind of a post-diagnosis one. I think I might have written that around the time that I was. I did a Arts Council residency at a school for girls with autism, 4 terms, and one of the things we all seemed to have in common was anxiety. So I think I wrote that around that time. Yeah.
Let's hear the next poem as well, which is Mask.
Yeah. So this one, after I establish the character, I kind of get into social interactions and difficulties with that or not, or feeling a bit of an outsider, adhering to the social rules, all those things that can be quite tricky for anyone, really. And the poem title, Mask, comes from the term masking, which is a term they often use with autistic girls and women very good at kind of putting on the persona of, I might even be wearing it now actually, putting on the persona of, you know, coping and sort of fitting in, and, you know, meanwhile kind of paddling like a duck underwater with your little legs going like that. So this is called Mask. My mask is made of flesh-toned skin, so thin it almost isn't there, and in it 7 seamless holes, each measured up for ease of wear. Most days I fix it to my face before I'll open my front door. Nobody knows I'm wearing it, or it wears me, I'm never sure. It's handy for the banter at a party. It can smile and frown, remains in place with nods and shakes, and if I'm looking up or down. On coming home, I'll peel it off and hang my gossamer disguise back on its hook, then look to see myself inside my mirrored eyes.
That last line really got me. In fact, I think I might even have gone and looked in the mirror to see if I could see the real me. Yes. After having read that poem.
I think I spent quite a long time as a teen staring in the mirror, not in a good way particularly, but just kind of saying, is this me? Am I that person?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to go to a question, because there's a question about the illustration here, and it's I don't know who it's from, it's anonymous, but the question is, oh, that wasn't the question that I thought I saw. It's a different question. It's, how did you discover you were autistic? I'm asking because someone has suggested that I might be autistic, and I'm not sure to do with this information.
Well, it's funny because, you know, obviously I've raised a son with autism, and actually I was a special needs teacher, and I worked with a lot of quite severely intellectually impaired autistic children, very different to myself. I went for a diagnosis to kind of rule it out, really, because I know that it can be familial, and I kind of joked that I probably was, but I wasn't really sure. But I kind of wanted to rule it out at a point in my life where I was feeling quite miserable, and I was kind of both very surprised and not at all surprised when I actually got the diagnosis, and that was the response from other people as well. Some people were like, "Nah, you're not," and other people were like, "Well, yeah," you know. So I haven't really quite got my head around it really ever since, but I did do a little bit of reflection about it afterwards, and it kind of put certain things in perspective. It kind of made me understand why I'd done certain things or acted in certain ways, or certain things had happened to me.
I thought I'd seen a question, but it seems to have disappeared. The question was about how your son Milo, if you know, how he felt about doing these illustrations. Maybe just give us some insight into the illustration process.
Well, we did talk about it for a while, because I kind of had this on the back burner for a while, and I always wanted him to do it. I thought, this is such a personal collection that I would like it to be illustrated by somebody who knows me really well, and he was up for it. I think last year he had a really difficult year with his own mental health, and so that was quite tricky. But he was up for it, definitely up for it. He put the little ears on the little girl has got. Not little girl, the girl has got these little rabbit ears that kind of change. So on this picture here, her ears are kind of flopping down because she's feeling a little bit anxious and worried, but sometimes they're erect and upright. And there's one poem about Van Gogh where there's half an ear. So I thought that was one of the best things about the book, that was his decision to add that little kooky little feature to the book.
She's in most of the illustrations, but not all of them, and we're going to see one where she doesn't appear, which I thought was quite interesting in this particular poem that you're going to read for us. Before we leave Mask completely, I was just thinking about some of the choices that you might have made with the form. unless people have got the book in front of them, they won't see that this poem Mask is set out on the page as non-rhyming couplets, but the two pairs of couplets go together, and the second and fourth lines are either rhymes or half rhymes. I've wondered if there's something more going on here than just the look of the poem, why the 4 lines, why it wasn't a 4-line stanza, if you like.
I don't know why I did that. I just felt that some of the lines needed a bit of space around them, because my poems can be quite dense, so I do like to have a little bit of white around each bit. I don't know why. I'm not sure.
I think that in itself is an interesting point. It's like thinking space.
Sometimes things just come kind of from the guts.
Just like an illustration, if you have plenty of white around it, you give more time to focus on the thing that's there. Really interesting. So we are going to hear a couple more poems now. I'm just going to take in fact, the next one has also got an image. It's 7 Dwarves. Now, these next 2 poems that you've chosen, they both have sort of fairy tale titles, and they seem deeply ironic. The humour, if indeed there is any humour there, seems a little bit more biting than in Worry Dolls.
Yeah, dark humour. I quite like a bit of dark humour. I mean, I think I read a lot of fairy tales, myths and legends when I was younger, and they kind of stayed with me through my teens in some form, and this one, it's kind of about relationships, because I talk about, boyfriends or relationships, whoever, partners, in this section of the book. And this one was kind of based on past boyfriends I've had, but I won't name the actual boyfriends, but I based them on the 7 Dwarves characters. So I'll just go through the dwarves in case you haven't watched Snow White for a while. So we've got Grumpy, Sleepy, Happy, Sneezy, Bashful, Dopey, and Doc. Shall I just read it? Okay, 7 Dwarves. One had anger issues, and he blamed them all on me. One stayed in his bedroom, so we met infrequently. One was always grinning, yet he couldn't tell a joke. One was word allergic, kept on sneezing when I spoke. One seemed keen. He flirted, but he failed to make a pass. One looked cute and stupid. He got worse when smoking grass. One believed in healing, though he never wrote a note. Now I'm lying in a glass box with an apple down my throat.
It's very convenient you had 7 of them.
I think I might have slipped a fake one in there, but some of them are real, I have to tell you.
I'll tell you that the last 2 lines in that poem, they're quite biting.
They are a bit biting, aren't they? Well, yeah.
In more ways than one.
More ways than one.
And I think this was the illustration that I found interesting, that there is no girl in this illustration. It's almost like she's been erased.
I don't know why. I think Milo just enjoyed messing around with the characters there. Yeah.
But she's also become a bit voiceless because she's got this apple in her throat.
Yeah, there is a bit of that. I mean, there's quite a lot about the voice in this book, really, in different places. I mean, certain themes come out, voice is definitely one of the themes, because I'm actually feel much more confident writing poems than I do speaking. I feel that my voice is best on the page rather than real life. Tell
us about some of the other ways in which voice threads through this book.
Well, there's one called Battle Call, where I wanted to make my voice heard. there's a poem I think we're going to read. The next one has got voice in it. Oh no, it's the one after. I suppose voice means it's wanting to be heard, wanting to be seen, wanting to be known for who I really am, you know. And like I say, I'm actually not that articulate off the page. I'm much more articulate on the page. I like to think about what I say. And voice is also about poetry, because poetry is all about voice, isn't it? It's about sing-song voice, it's about musicality, and it's about rhythm and intonation and all those things.
I'm going to take the slide share off for a moment for the next poem, and you don't need to see me for this one. You're going to read the bumper Book of Myths.
Yeah. So this one kind of relates to the other. It's a sonnet. I do like writing sonnets. And it's kind of about the putting away of childish things. Like I said, I did read lots of myths and legends when I was younger, and I remember sort of thinking that they might kind of protect me as I went into sort of the unknown territory of teen years. But the reality was that once I got to those teen years, my kind of magic realism beliefs system had broken down somewhat. So it's about, I think, 13-year-olds, 14-year-old selves, part of them want to be a little bit younger and part of them want to be a little bit older, you know. There's a kind of battle going on, and it's about that. Bumper Book of Myths. Once I kept a bumper book of myths beneath my quilt. I read them to believe. Inside the cover, claiming ownership, I wrote my signature, but didn't leave it there. Added on my home address, including England, Britain, Europe, Earth, the universe. I did it to impress, and in the hope that I might venture further than my postcode with my gods. Under their protection, I could learn to fight my battles. Nothing would be lost. I'd return, and they would be returned. I used my special blue handwriting pen. Yes, everything was easier back then.
Gosh, you're so good at those final two lines. So what is it about sonnets that you enjoy so much?
Oh, I think there's something about having, I mean, there are unrhyming poems in the book too, but there's something about having a very tight structure that you have to work with that actually I find really freeing. It can almost force you to come up with more interesting lines and more interesting images. And I also quite like the tightness of the sonnet, which can kind of hold quite nebulous thoughts. Do you know what I mean? Sort of it's restraining yet liberating, and I can put my complex and sometimes dark thoughts kind of neatly into a little contained package, which makes me feel good.
Are these Shakespearean sonnets that you're writing?
I can't remember which one this was. I mean, sometimes I'm quite loose with the form. I'm not always that tight, but I kind of basically keep to the iambic pentameter. I'm not sure what sort of sonnet this is, to be honest.
And the final two lines, there's usually a shift in thinking kind of, at that point.
What's the word? There's a word for it, isn't it? I can't remember. Hold fast or something. Yes. So I like to put quite a lot into those lines. Yeah. Makes you reread the whole thing in a slightly different light.
I think there were probably lots of people with us in the audience today who also did that thing with the address. I live in such and such a town, in this country, in this continent, in this world.
Sure,
we've all done it.
I'm not the only one doing that. Yeah. And it's kind of like as if the book would ever end up on Mars and have to be sent home. Do you know what I mean? But you end up doing it, you know.
We're going to change tone a little bit. I think we're going a little bit lighter in tone because we're going to hear the poem Freedom.
Yes. Yes. And like I said, there is a fair amount of darkness in the book. There's a lot of light as well. I don't want to cut you totally off. But kind of past that point, there's quite a few poems around resilience and acceptance of self and finding yourself through writing. That's a bit of a theme that comes up as well, which is all true in my life. And this poem I wrote for National Poetry Day, actually. They have a different theme each year, and the theme was freedom. And this was my kind of personification, imagining of what freedom, who freedom would be if I had my way. So it's my version of what I think freedom would be like. Freedom. She runs barefoot down the street, ignoring words that warn no entry, dances to her own tune. When she sings, it's hymn sheet, reads the book from a different page, recites the rules that she has written, digs a hole that she might fit in, picks at the lock of a songbird cage, marches to the sound of her own drum, skips a beat, beats out a skip, won't be held in your palm or grip or under anybody else's thumb. Can't be grounded. She refuses to remain behind the lines. Looking back, I saw the signs. She must do whatever she chooses.
It sounds to me like you had great fun breaking the rules by smashing through those cliches and idioms.
Yeah, I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the ABBA rhyme scheme on this one. It kind of gave it a little bit of a rhythm, like a skipping rhythm through it, I think. I like to mess around with the rhyme schemes.
Yeah. So was that, you talked about, having parameters with the sonnet. Was that a sort of parameter for yourself that you came up with about using these idioms throughout?
I think it must have been looking at it. Yeah, I don't know how I did it. I really don't. But yeah, I kind of wanted to take well-known stock phrases and idioms and kind of play with them a bit, and kind of pump it up a bit.
Rachel, I'd be really interested to know, I mentioned in the introduction that you've been a teacher for many years of children with special needs. I know that you have strong feelings about this collection being a really good collection for perhaps being used in English lessons in school.
It would be nice.
Well, what do you think would lend itself to that?
Well, there's a mixture of poems in here. It's a bit like Clark's Shoes. There's a bit of room for growth there. I also think there's some poems that would suit adults too. But there are some sort of higher end poems that I think probably could do with a bit of unpicking. I try to pack quite a lot in and put quite a lot of nuance and subtlety in some of the poems, and some of them I think would be ripe for unpicking in a classroom, or maybe even used as model poems for some children to model their own poems on.
Well, you won't believe how quickly time is passing, but it really is.
Oh, it is.
So what we're going to do, Rachel's going to read another poem called Advice from a Caterpillar. While she's doing that, well, listen to the poem, obviously, but I will, after that, be inviting open questions. So if you do have a question, be sure to put it in the Q&A box, because we'll have about 10 minutes for discussion at that point. So I love Advice from a Caterpillar. We're back to some, we're back to some nice light humour here.
Yeah, and this poem I wrote for a friend of mine, Michaela Morgan, did an anthology of poems around Alice in Wonderland called Wonderland, and I think teen years are a little bit like Wonderland. Sometimes you feel really big and sometimes you're small and life seems a bit strange. So I thought it it went quite well in this collection. And so in this one, I'm imagining the caterpillar not talking to Alice, but talking to, you know, the tiny egg, the pre-caterpillar egg. It's another sonnet, actually, I'm afraid. And it's kind of a retrospective, and it's offering hope, which is what I want to do. Advice from a caterpillar. When I was egg, I too clung on to leaf, in shaded safety, hidden underside, and fastened by a pinprick of belief, I dared to dream I was a butterfly. A hunger hatched, I ate the home I knew, then inched along the disappearing green. In shedding every skin that I outgrew, became 100 times the size I'd been. And now I'm spinning silk to fix my spot. Outside remains, inside I'm changing things. This caterpillar's planning on the lot, proboscis and antennae, 4 bright wings. So keep on clinging on, my ovoid one, for who you are has only just begun.
You know, the caterpillar's such an interesting character, both in your poem and in Alice, because the caterpillar talks like a grown-up, but it's not a grown-up yet.
He's not. No, he's only halfway there.
Yeah. So do you feel yourself that you're partway on the journey?
Yeah, I really think, well, I should be. I'm getting on a bit, so I hope so. But yeah, I think poetry has kind of helped me, you know, really helped me through. I had some quite difficult adult lifetimes, and it gave me a new career. I had to face challenges because of it, like public speaking, which I do find hard. But you know, ultimately, I can look back and I'm happy with what I've done, and you know, I've created what I hope is something nice out of some, you know, out of situations that haven't always been nice. That something positive has come out of them, you know. And as far as talking to a young teen, you know, I mean, they are changing all the time, aren't they? I mean, their bodies are changing every 5 minutes, and but inside they're changing. Their brains are developing. Puberty is a big time of change for the brain. And I read somewhere recently that your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25. That's when your frontal cortex is totally kind of mature. So, you know, just hold on there, hold on in. That's what I'm saying.
We've got a question coming in, and for anybody else, I hope you found the Q&A button, which is on the menu bar at the bottom. Before I go to the question, I've got one final question for you, Rachel. I once attended a workshop run by the wonderful John Agard, and he asked me if I was writing poetry. My answer was that I wrote poetry a lot in my teens and in my 20s, but I stopped in my 30s because I was too happy. And he said it's a very dangerous thing to think you can only write poetry when you're sad or angry. So my question is more of a general one. It's about emotional state and writing. Do you find that some moods are more conducive than others?
Yeah, I mean, when I wrote A Kid in My Class, for example, that was just a fun thing, you know. It was a kind of observational project, looking at all the different characters who might be in one class, and I didn't really have to. I mean, I put my all in it, but you know, a lot of the poems in here have come out of difficulty. I can't help it. I mean, I didn't, you know, and I wrote them and ultimately not to depress or annoy anybody else, but to make myself feel better. So there are kind of different sorts of poetry for different things, really. I mean, I can write a junior age poem quite easily without having any deep drive of emotion behind me, but I actually think my better work possibly is when I have when I am driven by something that's maybe troubling me or confusing me or bugging me in some way, you know. It's true. I mean, I don't want to say you've got to be miserable to write a poem, you know. not at all. I don't want to put that.
I'll tell next time I get the chance to talk to John Agard, I'll say angst is all right.
Yeah, well,
And
I can't help it, so I might as well make use of it.
We've got a couple of questions here. Ali Rogers asks, do you have any recommendations of adult poets that girls might move on to after Hey Girl? Any poets who might have appealed to the teenage you if they've been around when you were young?
Oh goodness, I don't know. I think a lot of people move on to spoken word stuff, don't they? Which is not really my bag. I'm more of a page poet, so I don't know. I mean, I always loved Carol Ann Duffy. I know it's a fairly stock answer, but I do love Carol Ann Duffy. And when I first started writing, I would always she was my benchmark of what I wanted to be as good at. So of course I never got there, but it's really good to have a benchmark that's too high for you. I don't know, I would go for a collection like Staying Alive or Being Alive, those Blood X collections. I'd go for a big anthology like that because they're great books.
Sort of linked to that, there's a question here. It's anonymous. Did you read much poetry as a teenager, and were there particular poems that spoke to you as a young woman?
Well, I think that's why I stopped writing, because I read as a child. I read, Christina Rossetti and Edward Lear and Ted Hughes and all that sort of stuff. But when I got to about 13, there wasn't much for me. I didn't find much that really spoke to me. We had a lot of poetry in the house, but had I met the Liverpool poets, I probably would have read them. But I don't remember. It totally fell off. I totally fell off the wagon in my teen years, which is kind of why I wrote this, because they didn't have all those lovely verse novels that they have these days. The only poem I remember that really affected me, well, I loved Under Milk Wood when I did that, but I was a bit older. I loved the lyricism and the musicality of, Under Milk Wood. But the only poem that I really remember that I really thought, yeah, I get this, was typically Stevie Smith, Not Waving But Drowning. Yes. When I was about 14, I thought, yeah, I get this. I kind of like that simple poems, but with deep layers behind it. But no, I totally fell off the wagon. I kind of got into music. I ended up hanging out in the music industry quite a lot, and going to punk concerts, and there's not a lot of lyrics going on there.
Poetry's got a young vibe now, hasn't it? There is a definite young vibe in poetry. Yeah. Jane Truran says National Poetry Day is a big thing in the girls' school that I work in. We have poems on loo doors, and the highlight in our is our poetries in our glorious grounds. Lots of poems hanging from the trees, blowing in the wind. We focus on a poet and wonder if you would be happy for us to use this collection. Is this a way you think poems can be shared and highlighted to sometimes reluctant young teens?
Oh, I'd be delighted if they used it. I love the idea of poetry in toilets. I've always thought that there should be more poetry in toilets, because there's a lot of hanging around in toilets, especially when you're queuing. So it's a bit like Poems on the Underground. They should have poems in toilets everywhere, I think, while you're waiting to have them on the doors. So I think that's a brilliant idea. And I'd be absolutely delighted if, look at my hair, absolutely delighted if some of those poems were used. Absolutely.
Just coming on here, Kirsty Applebaum has said, this is a wonderful collection, Rachel. Is your mind always overflowing with ideas for new poems, or do you have to work hard on generating new ideas? Do you have a particular idea generating process?
No, I'm quite a slow writer. I don't feel the need to keep on publishing books, so I quite like the kind of pressure cooker system. So I never sit down and write unless I'm kind of bugged. If I find myself thinking about something for more than 5 or 10 minutes, or lying in the bath thinking about something, or walking, if something's really bugging me about anything, that's when I'll write a poem. I think the the only collection that I've ever really sat down and said, right, I'm going to write this collection, was A Kid in My Class, because it was kind of like a concept album. So I'm a very slow, reluctant, let things boil, let things stew over, only write when I really need to. And I think when I do that, I write better stuff. I have no desire to sit down and write a poem if I haven't got some drive behind it at all. So I am one of those kind of chin rubby, staring out into middle distance poets, you know, a lot of thinking and a lot of chin rubbing, but not a lot of writing.
But it's quality that counts. So, you know, we've actually only got time for one more question, because we're going to have another poem to round us off this evening. Christian Wilton King says, do you feel that writing poetry enables you to understand yourself more?
Yes, I would say most definitely. It makes me understand what I'm really thinking, you know, because I might start off writing a poem about something, but then another thought will take over. And that's really what I was really deeply thinking without realizing it. So I think most definitely it helps me understand what I'm thinking, clarify my mixed thoughts in my head. And I find it very cathartic to see it on the page afterwards. And I tend to recite the poem. If I've written a poem and it's kind of formed on the page, I will recite that poem for quite a long time in my head as I'm walking around. I kind of really bond with it before I move on to another one. So
it's an earworm.
Yeah, my own it's my own earworm.
Yeah. So thank you so much for those questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to answer all of them. Please do put more comments and maybe even questions in the chat. I'm going to save the chat and send it on to Rachel and to Janetta after this event, in case you didn't get the chance to make your voice heard or seen in this case. We're going to hear one final poem in a moment, but I'm going to close the event before you hear the poem, because I thought it would be really good to end with Rachel's words. Sometimes endings can be a little ragged, and it seems to me that it'd be much more powerful just to end by hearing Rachel read a poem. So we're going to hear that in a moment, and then the event will be closed. Before I do that, I would quickly like to thank Janetta and Otter Barry Books for inviting me to partner with them today to launch this book. I'd like to thank all of you who've turned up, and there were a lot of you this evening, for taking the time on a sunny, probably one of the last sunny days of the year, to come along and enjoy this celebration. But of course, most of all, I want to thank Rachel for her new poetry collection and for sharing with us so honestly this evening and giving us an even greater appreciation of her poetry. I hope there's going to be more to come. And without further ado, I will share the screen for the final image. And when we've done that, I will invite Rachel to read Blessings. Give me 1 minute.
Ooh, not that one. Okay, so this poem is the penultimate poem in the book, and it's a really, really simple poem. And it was one of the poems I wrote when I was doing my 4-term Arts Council Autism and Poetry project at Limpswell Grange. And the idea was that we were to write positive blessing statements and turn them into a kind of little list poem and secrete them around the school for the other half, because only half the school did the project. So and as a way to involve the pupils who weren't involved in the project, we would place them around the school in hidden places for the other pupils to find, as a kind of, I don't know, just a nice positive message from an anonymous poet. So I'll read this now. It's very simple, and it's for all of you here tonight. Blessings. May you wake with the enthusiasm of a puppy in a leaf pile. May you find your mobile charged at full power. May every radio station play the tune you need to hear. May the answers in your head match the questions you're asked. May you notice the hint of colour in a rain cloud. May corridors become friendship tunnels. May dinner time pass without the start of an argument. May you surprise yourself with your own private bravery. May the darkness highlight one golden moment from today. May you fall asleep as leaves rock gently from their trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and good night to everybody as we go off to think about that poem.
Thank you so much, Nikki, for having me, and thank you to Janetta for publishing this.
Lovely.